Imagine a world, like in Planet of the Apes, where apes walk upright, speak perfect English, and, well, they rule over humans who become feral beasts. It's a terrifying image, definitely captures the imagination. But there's a pretty big scientific flaw, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. The idea that real apes could just pick up human culture purely through imitation, it doesn't really hold water. It misses the crucial point that you need an underlying evolved propensity, a sort of biological readiness for that kind of complex cultural learning.
Right, something that was built up over, what, millions of years?
Exactly. By this process, we call gene-culture coevolution. That initial premise, imitation alone, it just falls apart because it ignores this deep two-way street between our biology and our culture.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because what we're diving into today is honestly way more fascinating than science fiction, and it's real. It's this idea that our cultural stuff, like everything from the food we eat to how we organize our lives, doesn't just shape our societies, it actually influences our biological evolution, like literally changing our genes.
Think of culture not just as something produced by evolution, but as a sort of co-director. It actively steers the process.
A co-director, I like that.
Yeah. And we'll explore how this works. We've got insights from theoretical models, some really surprising anthropological case studies, and even cutting-edge genetic data to look at. You might naturally think, okay, biology sets the boundaries for culture.
Sure, seems logical.
But what's really mind-bending here is how powerfully our culture pushes back and reshapes our biology. It really flips that assumption.
So to really get a handle on this interaction, where do we start? What's the absolute core idea of gene-culture coevolution?
Well, at its simplest, you've got two inheritance systems interacting, our genes, obviously, and our culture. So our genetic tendencies influence what cultural things we learn or invent. But then, crucially, that cultural knowledge, our behaviors, our tools, our traditions, spreads and changes the rules of the game for natural selection.
So it's not just genes dictating things, it's a feedback loop.
A really rich, reciprocal feedback loop. Definitely not a one-way street.
And that connects to something called the cultural drive mechanism, right? Where selection favors getting better at copying culture.
Precisely. Natural selection starts favoring individuals who are better, more accurate, more efficient copiers of useful cultural practices. And this, in turn, puts fuel on the fire for the evolution of human cognition, our brain power. It's this continuous push-pull.
Wow. And this isn't just a nice story, is it? You mentioned theoretical work.
Yeah, the theoretical side is actually pretty solid. Mathematical modeling, which is, a big part of evolutionary genetics, has been used to build cultural transmission right into the evolutionary equations. And these studies consistently show that gene-culture coevolution is, at least in principle, highly plausible. The math backs it up.
Okay, let's make it concrete. Something I've always wondered about is handedness. Most people, maybe 90% globally, are right-handed. If right-handedness is so good, why isn't it 100%? Why are there still left-handers? Purely genetic models seem to have a tough time with that.
They really do.
Yeah.
I mean, look at twin studies. Identical twins who share all their genes, they're barely more likely to have the same handedness than fraternal twins who only share about half. That really throws a wrench into a purely genetic explanation, doesn't it?
It does, but culture clearly plays a role. You just have to think about the historical, discrimination against left-handers in many places. In some cultures, being left-handed was seen as clumsy or even unlucky, maybe even evil.
Right, and that societal pressure actually shows up in the numbers.
Yeah.
You see lower frequencies of left-handers in places where it was frowned upon, like studies comparing kids in China, where there was historically more pressure, to kids of similar background in the U.S., showed fewer left-handed writers in China.
So societal attitudes definitely impact the pattern.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So handedness, with this kind of global genetic tendency towards the right, but also these clear cultural influences, it's a perfect candidate for a gene-culture coevolution analysis.
Yeah.
And researchers built models incorporating both. A genetic predisposition, let's call it a dextralizing bias, favoring the right hand, and cultural factors, mainly parental influence. Things like direct instruction, imitation, even just unintentionally shaping how a child uses tools or rights.
And what did the model show? Did it explain the variation?
It did, rather elegantly.
Yeah.
It suggested that while there's this underlying genetic pull towards right-handedness, maybe making about 78% right-handed if nothing else interfered, parental influence significantly shifts those odds. If you have two right-handed parents, the chance of their child being right-handed jumps up by about 14% to 92%.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It is. And conversely, two left-handed parents decrease the probability by the same amount down to around 64%.
So the culture, in this case parental influence, acts almost like a buffer, keeping left-handedness around in the population, even with the genetic bias against it.
Exactly. It helps preserve that variation. It's a fantastic example of culture actively shaping the expression and frequency of what we might think of as a purely biological trait.
And this isn't just theoretical, right? There's archaeological evidence linked to this.
There is. It connects beautifully to early tool making. When our ancestors were knapping stone tools, the way they rotated the core stone is a pretty reliable sign of handedness.
Ah, interesting.
And the archaeology shows this increasing right-handed bias over deep time. Maybe 57% in the earliest toolmakers, creeping up to the Middle Pleistocene. And by the time you get to Neanderthals, it's like 80–90% right-handed preference.
Suggesting ongoing selection.
Continuous selection, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can imagine how the social learning of tool-making skills would feed into this.
Like apprentices imitating their right-handed tutors.
Probably. So as the genetic bias for right-handedness increased, more kids were also being culturally influenced by right-handed parents and tutors. It creates this reinforcing loop.
Culture reinforcing genetics. And genetics providing the raw material for culture to work on. That two-way street again.
Perfectly put. So the models show it's plausible, the maps works out. But let's move beyond theory and look at some really solid historical examples. Cases where the evidence is pretty much incontrovertible.
Okay, like what?
Well, a really famous one, but still fascinating when you dig into the details, is the coevolution of dairy farming and lactose tolerance.
Ah, yes, the ability to digest milk as an adult.
Right. Most people know the basics. Some populations can, some can't. But the key coevolutionary point is that dairy farming and drinking milk culturally came first.
Before the genes for digesting it became common.
Exactly. The cultural practice emerged, and then the genetic variants allowing adults to digest lactose spread through those populations.
And that genetic spread was fast, wasn't it?
Incredibly fast. We're talking less than 9,000 years for these lactose tolerance alleles to become common in some places. That's considered one of the strongest responses to natural selection ever detected.
Wow. Why so strong and so fast? What drove it?
Two main reasons, probably. First, human cultural activities tend to be purposeful, goal-directed. People weren't randomly drinking milk. They were intentionally farming animals and consuming dairy over many, many generations. That creates very consistent selection pressure.
Okay, consistent pressure.
Second, when a beneficial cultural practice like dairying spreads rapidly, lots of individuals are exposed to the new selective pressure very quickly. This allows selection to act really efficiently on any advantageous genes that pop up.
And how accurately the culture was passed down mattered too.
Right. Hugely. There was modeling work by Mark Feldman and Luca Cavalli-Sforza that showed the spread of the lactose tolerance gene depended crucially on the probability that the children of milk drinkers themselves became milk drinkers.
So faithful cultural transmission was essential for the gene to take off.
Absolutely. And this whole coevolutionary package, the farming, the milk drinking, the genetic change, it allowed humans to move into new environments, maybe colder regions, where vitamin D from sunlight was scarce, but milk provided it. And it spurred new technologies for cheese, yogurt, and so on.
A classic case of us building our own niche and then adapting biologically to it.
Precisely. Cultural niche construction driving genetic change.
And this applies beyond just food, right? Like when humans first moved out of Africa.
Definitely. Think about Homo erectus moving out of tropical Africa almost 2 million years ago. That was a massive environmental shift. Surviving in colder, more seasonal climates absolutely required new cultural tools. Stone tools for butchering animals, controlling fire for warmth and cooking, probably clothes, maybe better shelters, more coordinated hunting.
All cultural innovations enabling survival in a new physical environment.
Right, and those new environments, which we could only inhabit because of culture, then exerted new selective pressures on our genes.
Like skin pigmentation.
Skin pigmentation is a big one. But also things like heat tolerance and even how our bodies handle salt. Genes related to salt retention seem to have been selected differently in hotter versus cooler climates. Culture opened the door to the new environment, and the environment then shaped the genes.
It makes you think about things like the Polynesian thrifty gene hypothesis, too.
Ah, yes, that's another compelling, though perhaps slightly tragic example. The idea is that early Polynesians, undertaking these incredibly long and dangerous ocean voyages,
Facing starvation and cold.
exactly, they would have faced intense selection favoring genes that promoted enhanced energetic efficiency and fat storage. Basically, genes that made them very good at storing calories.
A lifesaver back then.
Absolutely essential. But now, fast forward to today's world with abundant food.
Those same genes become a liability.
Potentially, yes. predisposing people to obesity, type 2 diabetes. It really highlights how adaptations beneficial in one culturally shaped environment can become detrimental when the culture and environment change. It poses that tough question. How do our ancestral adaptations, driven by past cultures, affect us now?
That's sobering. Let's shift to another really complex example, the Kwa-speaking peoples in West Africa. This involves farming, disease, genetics. It sounds like a real cascade.
It's an absolutely astonishing cascade of feedbacks. For centuries, maybe millennia, certain Kwa-speaking groups practiced slash-and-burn agriculture to cultivate yams.
Okay, standard practice in some tropical regions.
Yes, but clearing the forest like that had a major unintended side effect. It created lots of open, sunlit pools of standing water.
Which are perfect breeding grounds for.
Exactly, malaria-carrying mosquitoes. So their farming technique inadvertently created a massive malaria problem.
Oh, wow. So culture increased the disease pressure.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
And this, in turn, led to incredibly strong natural selection, favoring a specific gene variant, the sickle cell allele, HBS.
Right, the sickle cell trait. Having one copy protects against malaria.
Precisely. If you have one copy of the HBS allele, if you're a heterozygote, you get significant protection against malaria. The downside is, if you inherit two copies, you get severe sickle cell anemia.
So it's a trade-off. But in a high malaria environment, the benefit of one copy outweighs the risk.
It seems so. It's a classic example of heterozygote advantage.
Yeah.
And the link to culture is clear because neighboring groups who didn't practice yam cultivation in the same way don't show the same high frequency of the HBS allele.
The cultural practice is definitely the trigger.
Unmistakably. And there's more evidence. In places where malaria was later eradicated, like on the island of Curacao compared to the nearby mainland where malaria persisted,
The frequency of the sickle cell gene went down.
significantly. Clear evidence of relaxed selection once the environmental pressure, intensified by culture, was removed.
But wasn't there something absolutely amazing about the yams themselves?
This is the really astonishing twist.
Yeah.
Researchers were, and I quote, astonished to find that the yams these groups cultivated actually contain compounds that can alleviate the symptoms of sickle cell anemia.
Get out. Seriously.
Seriously. Which leads to this powerful hypothesis. Maybe these groups initially suffered from the anemia caused by the gene they needed for malaria protection, and then they specifically switched to or intensified yam cultivation after discovering its medicinal benefits for that very condition.
So culture causes problem, genetics adapts, culture finds solution in more culture.
It's layers upon layers. And the theoretical work suggests this connection could even explain the spread of slash and burn itself.
How so?
The idea is that slash and burn might have spread rapidly, not just because it was a good farming technique, but because it created the malaria conditions that favored the HBS gene. People carrying HBS were more likely to survive and reproduce in those malaria-ridden areas. So the cultural practice essentially hitchhiked to prevalence on the back of the genetic selection it itself had generated.
That's incredible. The practice spreads because it favors a gene that protects against a problem the practice itself created.
Mind-bending, isn't it? You have one cultural activity, planting yams via slash and burn, leading to selection for HBS, potentially then a switch to yams for medicinal reasons, development of treatments, use of pesticides, and maybe the spread of the farming practice itself. Causation flows from culture to genes and back again, round and round.
It's a dizzying dance, like you said. Okay, so these historical cases are powerful. What about looking directly at our DNA now? Can we see the signatures of culture written in our genes today?
We absolutely can. That's where the third line of evidence comes in the genetic data itself. In recent years, geneticists have developed really sophisticated methods to detect statistical signatures of recent positive selection acting on the human genome. We're talking within the last, say, 50,000 years.
And they're finding these signatures.
Thousands of them. Thousands of genes show signs of having been recently favored by natural selection.
And the link to culture.
That's the crucial part. A large proportion, as the researchers put it, of these recently selected gene variants seem to have been favored precisely because of human cultural practices. Our culture has been a major engine of recent human evolution.
Let's go back to diet for a second. You mentioned lactose tolerance.
Right, and there's more. Take the salivary amylase gene, AMY1. It produces the enzyme that starts breaking down starch in your mouth. Different populations have different average numbers of copies of this gene. And critically, the number of copies correlates really well with how much starch has traditionally been in their diet.
So Cultures that ate more starchy foods ended up with more copies of the gene to digest it.
That's the idea. More copies means better starch digestion, maybe even protection against certain gut diseases if starch isn't digested properly. It's another clear dietary adaptation driven by cultural food choices.
And it's not just starch, is it?
No, far from it. Genes involved in metabolizing proteins, other carbs, fats, even alcohol show signs of recent selection linked to diet. Genes affecting tooth enamel thickness, bitter taste receptors, the list goes on. It really becomes hard to escape the conclusion that gene culture coevolution has profoundly shaped our digestive biology. Our menus have literally sculpted our genes.
Okay, what about the brain? That's the organ we most associate with culture. Has culture shaped the evolution of our brains too?
Immensely. There's a strong correlation between increases in hominin brain size over evolutionary time and advances in cultural technology. And one key factor seems to be, again, food processing. Think about chopping, grinding, and especially cooking. These cultural transmitted techniques basically started the digestive process outside the body.
Pre-digesting the food.
Exactly, creating pre-digested food. This likely allowed our ancestors to evolve smaller guts, which are energetically expensive, and divert that saved energy to growing and maintaining larger, even more expensive brains.
So cooking fueled brain evolution.
It looks that way. Control of fire and cooking techniques were probably crucial. And our diet choices themselves are a mix of biology and culture. We have this innate palate fatigue that encourages variety.
You get sick of eating the same thing every day.
Right. But what we choose to eat, what we avoid, food phobias, cooking methods, table manners, that's heavily guided by cultural traditions.
And can we see genetic changes related to the brain itself?
Yes. Numerous genes involved in brain growth, nervous system development, learning, memory, cognition. Many of these show statistical signatures of recent positive selection in humans. Our lineage shows way more evolutionary changes in brain-related genes compared to chimpanzees, especially in areas like the prefrontal cortex, which is key for planning and complex decision-making.
And language must be a huge part of this. What about genes like FOXP2?
FOXP2 is a famous example. It's clearly linked to speech and language abilities. And the human version of FOXP2 shows strong evidence of positive selection after we split from chimps. It suggests that selection favored changes in this gene that were necessary, or at least very helpful, for developing complex language, a cornerstone of human culture.
It all ties together, even things like living longer.
Even longevity, potentially. As cultural practices allowed humans to live longer lives, genes involved in, say, cellular maintenance and removing accumulated toxins might have become more important. Like certain housekeeping genes, the paper mentions vacuole protein genes involved in clearing out cellular junk. Over a longer lifespan, keeping the cellular machinery clean becomes more critical. So culture, by extending lifespan, changes the selective value of certain genes.
What about how we look? Things like skin color, hair color. Could culture influence that through mate choice?
That's a really intriguing area. We know lighter skin evolved relatively recently in populations outside Africa. Genes affecting skeletal development, hair color, eye color, even freckles also show signs of recent selection. And this raises a fascinating question. Could culturally learned mating preferences, which definitely vary between populations and are passed down socially, be driving sexual selection for these physical traits?
So culture dictating beauty standards, which then influences who reproduces, changing gene frequencies?
Potentially, yes. And because cultural trends can change much faster than genetic predispositions, this could be a very potent and rapid evolutionary force.
Wow. There's even a connection to jaw muscles and cooking, right?
Yes, another neat example. There's a specific gene, MYH16, involved in producing a major protein in jaw muscles. Most humans have a mutation, a deletion in this gene that significantly weakens those muscles compared to other primates.
And this happened around the time cooking emerged.
The timing seems to fit, roughly around 2 million years ago. The idea is that cooking softened food so much that powerful chewing muscles were no longer essential. Cooking removed a constraint, allowing this mutation, which might otherwise have been harmful, to spread because it wasn't needed anymore, and maybe freeing up resources for other things, like brain growth. Technology literally reshaping our anatomy.
It's not just about selecting for genes, but also allowing genes to change when culture removes a previous pressure.
Exactly. And culture doesn't just influence which genes are selected. It can even direct how genes flow between populations.
How does that work?
Through social systems and cultural rules. Think about marriage patterns and where couples live after marriage. In societies that are strongly patriarchal, meaning the wife moves to the husband's community, you tend to see more flow of female-specific genetic markers, like mitochondrial DNA, between groups.
Okay, because the women are moving.
Right. But in matrilocal societies where the husband moves, you see more flow of male-specific markers, like the Y chromosome.
So the cultural rules about marriage literally channel gene flow differently.
Yes. Studies on South American groups, for example, have shown that differences in their social structures and cultural practices have actually led to different rates of biological evolution among them. Culture is directing the traffic of genes.
So bringing this all together for today, is natural selection over? We have medicine, better hygiene, birth control.
That's a common misconception, but no, natural selection is definitely not over for humans. The pressures have changed, but they haven't disappeared. We still see evidence for ongoing selection. For instance, studies in modern populations have found selection seemingly favoring women who start having children earlier, and perhaps also those who have children later in life or go through menopause later. Biology is still adapting.
And culture is still directing that adaptation.
Absolutely. Culture continues to shape the selective environment. Maybe in developed countries, variations in fertility, who has children and how many, are now a stronger driver of selection than sheer survival. Whereas in developing countries, mortality, often from infectious diseases, might still be a more dominant selective force. The specifics change, but the interplay continues. Culture is still very much in the driver's seat, shaping our ongoing evolution.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive really makes it clear that gene-culture coevolution isn't just some fringe idea, it's fundamental.
It really is. The evidence we've looked at, from the theoretical models showing it's plausible, to the anthropological cases like lactose tolerance and the QA, to the actual genetic signatures in our DNA, it all builds an incredibly strong and incontrovertible case, as the source material puts it.
Cultural processes are just as important as genetic ones.
Every bit as influential. They can speed up genetic evolution, slow it down, change its direction.
And it completely refutes that old idea of genes hold culture on a leash.
Totally. The leash tugs both ways, maybe even more strongly from the culture end sometimes. Yes, our biology shapes our capacity for culture, but our culture has profoundly reshaped our genome in return. We didn't just evolve to our world. We actively built large parts of our environment through culture, and then we adapted biologically to the world we have built.
It's like this self-catalyzing process.
Exactly, an autocatalytic process ramping up human evolution, especially the evolution of our minds.
So the final thought then. If our minds and our cultures have been locked in this intimate feedback loop for so long, constantly shaping each other, what does that imply for our future? We're still building our niche, maybe faster than ever, with technology, new foods, new social structures. What kinds of selective pressures might we be creating right now without even realizing it?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? What surprising biological changes might be unfolding under the surface, driven by the cultures we're creating today? It makes you think about our current life